Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Anyone got some spooky stories about prison or being in one? I have a small one. Get locked up for a weekend near Halloween. DUI. Thrown in alone next to twins. They won't talk to anyone but each other. They constantly are hugging. A woman in the main area always has a towel wrapped around her head and just a nightshirt on. All she does is scream till they force her back into her cell. There is always a loud metallic echo from the floor that no one can tell me what it is. Didn't sleep for 3 days, starting to see twisting, darting shadows, probably from lack of sleep.
Being locked up for the weekend isn't exactly prison. And what do you mean a weekend for a DUI? That was your sentence? That doesn't make sense.
Where I live, you can't post bail till Monday. So if you get locked up on a Friday night, you're stuck till Monday morning.
I'm an ex-prison guard for a private company. I've worked several prisons over the years, but nothing has been more disturbing and unpleasant than the one I worked on the border of Mexico and Texas. It was about 2 years ago. I had just moved to this town, and I really didn't know about all the urban legends and all the supernatural stuff that goes on in this place. I've experienced many different things while working in prisons, especially that one. But the things that always got to me were the shadows. They weren't shadows though, they were black silhouettes, walking around, crawling on all fours on the ceiling while guards would do their rounds. There's so many of them too. It takes every ounce of willpower to ignore them once they show up, and you were considered blessed if you never ran into them. Get stuck working first tour, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift in the oldest part of the prison, built in 1901, roughly 2:30, trying not to nod out in the office. Bunch of inmates start screaming at the end of the block. Go down and ask what they're doing. Correctional officer, there's somebody out there. Huh. Inmates in cells next to him tell me, there's a brother out there with no face. Tell them to calm down and tell me what's going on. They claim that they heard someone whispering to themselves when they looked up from their beds. They saw someone walking out in front of the cells in a long coat, and when he turned and looked at them, he had no face. 2 things spring to mind. Either one, they're trying to screw with me, but they do seem kind of worried, or two. An inmate is walking around outside his cell. Get a flashlight, do another count. All inmates accounted for, got on telephone and called the second officer to see if he was on the block. Nope, he's still in the break room. At this point, I'm tired from working a double and pissed that these inmates are playing games, about to go scream at them. As I'm exiting the office, notice movement on one of the upper tiers. Point my flashlight up near the staircase and definitely see the tail end of somebody moving out of my light on the upper tier. Pull my baton out of the holster and book it to the staircase, yelling at them to stop. Get to the top with the baton out, hand ready to drop the flashlight and hit the alarm button on my radio if I get jumped. Walk up and down the upper tier block looking for this inmate or person. Now, the way this block is laid out is that on each of the 4 tiers, there's a locked gate that leads to a catwalk in the middle so you can observe each cell through a small peep window in the back of the cell. Check gate, still locked. Shine light down the catwalk, nothing. Start making my way upstairs to check the uppermost tier when my office door slams shut. Book it back down to the office. Check everywhere in there, including both bathrooms and refrigerator. Nothing. Decide I've had enough of this, call my second officer back down to the block, and we start scouring every inch of that block looking for this person before I report this to the sergeant. Do a count of every inmate on every tier. Thoroughly check everywhere except the catwalk, since you can shine a light down it and illuminate the entire thing. This fact is important. Everything seems to check out. At this point, we go back to the office and are on edge. We have no idea if there's an inmate out there trying to plot an escape, or if someone actually broke into the prison or what. Thankfully, the rest of the night goes uneventful. However, fast forward to 6 a.m., wake-up call. Do my go-around taking attendance for morning chow. Inmates on the second tier ask me why I was walking the catwalk at 5 in the morning. What? Inmates swear they saw somebody walk by the peep ports in their cells, where the catwalk would be, and could hear the person talking to themselves. They assumed it was me. That's pretty much the end of it. The inmates who originally saw the person now claim their block is haunted and scare the crap out of the other inmates with it. Thank Christ I haven't had to work in that block since then. I have no explanation as to what happened that night, be it some ghost or my own sleep-deprived mind toying with me.
I'm a correction officer, on post at a training academy a half-mile away from the prison I work at. Alone by myself, doing rounds checking on the area. Old abandoned prison 40 yards away from training buildings. 9 p.m. Outside alone when I see a guy walking. Yell at him to stop and come here. Keeps walking, realizing he's a solid black mass. Walks through the old prison perimeter fence and into the old abandoned gym. Nope.jpg. Ran back into the main training building, got my stuff, and drove back to the main compound. I'm not afraid of 2,000 inmates, but a shadow makes me piss myself.
Alright, so back when I was 18, I was an edgy anarchist trying to impress my friends. One stupid idea led to another and I found myself in the back of a cop car, handcuffs on my wrists, and my next stop was the county jail. Now, if any of you have been locked up, you know that if you get arrested on a Friday, like I did, the judge doesn't see you until Sunday morning. Obviously, I was more scared about getting attacked, which turned out to be a huge misconception in jail at least. It seemed like everyone there just wanted to go home. Prison, however, may be a different story, but I digress. Anyways, we pull up to the county jail. He parks his car and I spend the next hour or so getting booked and dealing with all that shit. At the time, I was a heroin addict. I was really making good choices at that time in my life. And they stuck me in a detox cell with a few other junkies. At first, I just sat around, minding my own business. I hadn't had a hit in almost 7 hours, so I was really starting to feel sick. There was one toilet in the cell, a few wall benches, and that was really it. It was around this time that I met Proudhon, or at least that's what he called himself. Now, let me tell you, I didn't look too great at this point, but Proudhon looked like he hadn't eaten, showered, or slept in days. He couldn't have been a few years older than myself. As I eventually found out, he was 24. But the guy looked like he was 35 or 40 and had made some bad decisions. He walked over towards me with a limp, introduced himself. We exchanged greetings and he started to tell me about his upcoming socialist revolution. At this point, I realized that this is where he got his name Proudhon from. You know, he looked strung out, so I kinda just humored him and asked him to, "Yeah, really? How are you gonna do that?" This really pissed him off and he started to scream at me. Being dope-sick locked in a prison cell on a Friday night was the last place that I wanted to be. But with this guy yelling at me, it made it worse. Me and a couple of the other junks told him to calm down, that we believe him, etc. But he just wouldn't calm down. This is where it gets weird. I was looking into his eyes trying to tell him to calm down when they started to rapidly change colors. They would flash from dark blue to red to yellow to purple and back to brown in the matter of a few seconds. Apparently I wasn't the only one who saw it because another guy went, "Man, what the hell is wrong with your eyes?" Proudhon smiled, tilted his head back, opened his mouth and began to speak, if I can call it that. It sounded like the son of the devil from Ghost Rider. Like he had multiple voices speaking all at once without him moving his lips. Me and the other degenerates moved back and kind of formed a semicircle with our bodies against the wall. I could tell that none of us wanted to get close to him. What he was saying, though, was impossible for him to know. He began mocking me for letting my dog die. The poor guy starved to death because I spent all of my money on dope. It is the biggest regret of my life, and not a day goes by that I don't regret it. I was a piece of shit back then, and I'm a different person now. I actually work at a veterinary clinic. I love that dude, but the dope screwed it up. Sorry about that. I just can't talk about him without getting emotional. He yelled at another guy that his wife was cheating on him. By the look in his eyes, it seemed like he was under suspicion already. He was saying shit like that, stuff he couldn't possibly know. After yelling at us, he tilted his head forward again, closed his mouth, and his eye color stabilized. Without speaking, he sat down on the bench furthest from the door, laid on his side, and fell asleep. After we were sure that he was out, the rest of us glanced at each other, unsure looks. Our eyes all said the same thing. What the hell just happened? My adrenaline began to slow, and I realized that I was still dope sick in a prison cell. I asked one of the other guys if he wanted to sit next to me so we could watch each other's backs. He complied, and I spent the rest of the night like that. Morning came, and so did the guards with the methadone. We were all let out of the cell and placed into the general population. Proudhon must have gone to another block because he wasn't on mine. Monday came. My friends bailed me out, and that was that. It was still the creepiest thing to ever happen to me, and I don't have a rational explanation for it. Try not to get locked up, guys. God knows who you'll meet in the pen.
Be in jail. Old man talking about aliens, gang stalkers, and Nunaki. He's in jail for stealing cars while high on meth. Tells me he just walks around Tesla dealerships touching the door handles until he finds one that the keys were left inside. Stole a Mercedes AMG from the dealership because the keys were inside. Ran out of gas, stole a Tesla, took the Mercedes to the tire shop after someone slashed the tires. He tried to pay with checks, but the tire shop wouldn't let him. Got suspicious about this dude with a new $120,000 car who can't pay for a new tire. They call the cops. He gets locked up. I think some of them are pretending to be schizos. I don't doubt they are delusional and actually schizo from meth abuse, but they are naturally going to exaggerate and play the crazy game hardcore until they get let off the hook.
In 2007, at the facility I work in, we had a self-end. A young inmate hung himself in his cell and was unable to be resuscitated. The coroner's report would list time of death on the way to the hospital by suffocation or, more general, lack of oxygen. In the short amount of time the inmate had, he managed to crush his larynx with a bedsheet made into a rope. So no matter what help he was being given, nothing could revive him from his goal of death. I know this is very common amongst prison settings and is seldom remembered years later. Some say ghosts have unfinished business and that is why they hang around. I only write this because I knew the inmate and the fellow officers, who, knowing me, brought the story to my attention. Bear with me while I try to lay the scene and the occurrence as best as I can remember. Several officers run the housing units where the inmates are housed. This particular inmate was in the mental health dorm of the maximum confinement unit where I used to work. The housing unit is a 2-story unit with individual cells housing at most 2 inmates per cell. Generally in mental health, the inmates are housed alone. Only trained officers are assigned to these units, meaning they have some degree of knowledge in mental health, human behavior, and have a calm demeanor. The dorm has 2 officers assigned to a mental health dorm, and they are relieved by a sergeant or officers with similar training. Usually the same officers will work the dorm for years at a time. During a count, Officer Jones was checking all cells and noticed that in cell 10 that an inmate was standing in the cell looking out the window towards the stars. Officer Jones checked his clipboard to see which inmates were being housed in the cell, as there were 2 inmates asleep in their bunks and 1 standing. He recognized the names and knew both, but did not recognize the inmate standing observing the sky so intently. He called down to Officer Smith and asked who the 3rd inmate was in cell 10. Officer Smith checked his computer and logs and told Officer Jones that there were only 2 inmates assigned to the cell. Officer Jones went down to the officer's desk and began looking through the head sheet, which shows all inmates' names and a mugshot photo. The inmate in question could not be found on the sheet. Both officers decided they needed to check the cell. Upon arrival at the cell door, they both only noticed 2 inmates, still asleep in their bunks, and the 3rd was nowhere to be found. They opened the cell door, checked the walls, vents, and anywhere else a tunnel could have been dug to no avail. Officer Smith then asked for a description of the inmate that Officer Jones had seen. Officer Jones described a slender build, medium height, black male possibly in his late teens or early 20s. They had several inmates fitting that description, so they went cell by cell and checked every bunk. All the inmates were accounted for, all asleep in their bunks. A few nights went by and Officer Jones was telling his story to a fellow officer who had stopped by the zone to get some coffee and chew the fat. The officer thought it was funny that full-grown men could still believe in such fairy tales and proceeded to poke fun at the officers and the ghost in question. When all the officers present noticed a black transparent cloud move from the lower staircase, linger for a few seconds, then enter the supply closet. They each said as the object moved, the lights would dim, but the wall and brick could still be seen through the dark smoke. The next night, they noticed the black transparent cloud in the visitation area on the upper tier in the housing unit moving through the rooms one by one. Then it would descend the stairs and enter the supply closet. As I began writing this, I had the opportunity to work on this pod for a night and figured it would be a good chance to see if anything out of the ordinary would happen. Nothing did, but I was told by several inmates that there had been a little girl roaming the housing unit, and they called her Dixie. I asked the inmate why they called her that, and he said due to her having deep blue eyes and a pale white complexion. The inmate even went as far as to show me a picture of her that he had drawn. In the picture, it shows a girl possibly about 7 years old in clothing that could only be described as Sunday dress clothes, Medium height and slender build with long hair that the inmate said was black. He told me she never speaks, but she walks the floor every night and she's been turning on showers and lights on and off. I will stick with this one because it has caught my interest, not so much the black cloud being as I could understand why it would be at this place. All the dark energy surrounds a place like this, so it is not so far-fetched to see a negative entity. But the little girl makes no sense at all. Why would it be here, and what connection does it have to this place? Perhaps a victim coming back to haunt its tormentor in life, or just a wandering lost spirit, or possibly maybe just a figment of the inmate's imagination.
Jail was unironically very spooky for me. In jail for 2 weeks. Cellmate was a local bong shop owner and former Hells Angel. Went to jail for fighting a bunch of cops at once. Talked about how he was a clone. Talked about how he went to Jamaica once and met Mila Kunis's clone. Talked about being an intelligence asset. Talked about how power structures at the elite level are both good and evil. Talked about wanting to find and kill the original him after he gets released. Talked about how he can fly and walk through walls when he undergoes unspecified and highly classified zone therapy by his intelligence handlers. Talked about needing to forfeit his hand to his handlers so they can clone him. Talked about wanting to kill his handlers because he knows once he himself gets cloned, his clone will be instructed to find and kill him. Said he didn't know how long this had been going on. Man, that is just some of the weird shit he would get into. That's the stuff I remember. Oh yeah, says his daughter married into the Italian mafia and was murdered after he got cloned. Says his mom tried to kill him numerous times. Oh shit, I just Googled him out of curiosity and it turns out he's dead. What a trip. Anyway, jail is a totally spooky place, Anon. Lots of schizos, weirdos, and scary dudes.
I was a correctional officer for the better part of a year at the infamous Huntsville unit in Texas, where we execute death row inmates. Saw quite a bit of weird stuff. Unit is very old, built in the 1800s originally, so there's a lot of doors that are permanently locked and no one has keys to access anymore. At the very end of the block is one of these doors. The small window in it is painted over. It seems to lead to the giant dividing wall that cuts this giant 4-story building into 2 smaller ones, one for transfer inmates and the other for permanent residents. There is space in the wall because there are windows in it. All of them are painted over or have blinds that are drawn, no way to see inside. I'm doing my regular security checks at the top floor cell block, super pissed because my key boss is a piece of garbage that literally everyone hates, and my inmates have been giving me lip about the cold since it's winter, and we have limited blankets. Hear shouting at the end of the cell block and look up from my clipboard to see what looks like a heat shimmer, like what you'd see on the roads in the summer. A wall of it right in front of that door. It's freezing in here though, get a bad feeling. The inmates in the last cell nearest to it shouting doesn't help. Start making my way toward it, yelling for the inmates to shut up. Doesn't dissipate as I draw nearer like heat shimmers do. Finally, I'm standing right in front of it. Inmates in the cells that can see me watching intently. Think one of them was praying. Suddenly there's a loud thud, and the door shutters like someone just threw their body weight into it. Neck hair standing on end at this point, and I'm pretty freaked out. The inmates are telling me to leave it alone. I turn around to go to the cell block entrance and make a call for a sergeant on the radio. By the time he arrives, the shimmer is gone. Anon, no one has had access to that section in over 50 years. Oh. Got one that isn't paranormal, but still disturbing. If y'all want more, I'll keep sharing. Working a G4, G5 cell block, which is basically as high security as it gets at my unit with the exception of administrative segregation. Doing my security checks when I walk by this one guy's cell who is a pretty notorious self-harmer by this point. Did meth for like 30 years straight, so he often spirals into severe psychosis. As I'm coming up on the cell, I start to smell the coppery smell of blood, and I get that uneasy feeling that tells me what I'm about to find is really bad. The inmate in the cell before this guy is giving me a look and shaking his head. Oh man, why'd this have to happen on my shift? Brace and walk in front of the cell. Blood everywhere, painting the walls. This dude had broken a disposable razor open and had sliced open both of his arms in 6 or 7 places each. Lengthwise too, so he's gushing blood everywhere. He's looking at me with this manic grin, blood pouring out of his arms as he's eating chopped up bits of electrical cord from his fan. Tell him to stop. but it's like he can't hear me, so I spray him down with gas. Keep in mind this is way more potent than standard pepper spray. I've seen it turn hardened murderers into screaming, crying messes in under a minute. This guy doesn't even flinch, even with the stuff and gaping wounds. Might as well have been hot sauce for his electrical cord snack. Eventually, the backup I called for arrives. We have to run a 5-man team on him because he won't come peacefully. No one knows how the hell he's still alive, let alone fighting back after losing so much blood. Subdue him and cart him off to medical. Eventually he gets back from Skyview and I get put on constant and direct observation. He recognizes me and has a good laugh when he realizes I was the one to find and spray him. Proceeds to hold a normal conversation for the next 8 hours of observation. It's weird, man.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
The unit was actually pretty nice to work at. The inmates typically only attacked each other. No guard has died there in a very long time. There are a lot of stories and rumors among the prisoners, though. We executed one of the last remaining Indian chiefs at the unit, and a lot of people have claimed to see a Native American wandering the grounds at night. Never saw him myself, though. Another crazy, non-paranormal one is as follows. Doing security checks, and an inmate calls me over to his cell. He tells me if I don't let him out, he's going to cut himself. They lie about this all the time to try and get into the air-conditioned psych unit. Laugh it off and tell him I'll only be impressed if he cuts something off. Walk off, but then hear, "Hey, boss man." Turn around just in time to see this guy roll his severed member out from underneath his cell door. Shout what the hell and immediately call a flash. Guy survives, gets his dong sewn back on and everything. A few days later, he proceeds to do the same thing. Except this time it's a female CO and he flushes it down the toilet. Poor girl quit the same day. I saw her after it happened and she looked like she was in shock.
Work at a prison as a correctional officer. Current post is graveyard shift and in charge of patrolling the outside perimeter of the prison. Everybody sleeps on the first watch. Go into the admin building, which has some nice couches to lay down on. Always hear footsteps and keys clacking. Narrow it down to my imagination. There's a mural of dead officers in the room next to the one I'm in. Asleep for about 30 minutes. Wake up to the sound of running footsteps down the hall and an alarm sounding. I hear keys and the clanking against our pepper spray that we carry. Try to wake up. Can't even open my eyes. Paralyzed. Thinking my partners are messing with me. The sound of the footsteps get closer and I can hear more as if there are more officers. Responding to an alarm. Trying to move my head. After about 10 to 15 seconds, I'm able to move my neck, sit up and look around. Leave.
I was one of those incredibly stupid or naive young people that didn't read the fine print before signing on the dotted line. I found myself hundreds of kilometers away from where I had intended, at the gates of Kroonstad prison. Thankfully, not as an inmate, but as a new prison wardress. I had decided to join the correction services, in the thought that I would be stationed in Johannesburg, where my fiancé was stationed as a policeman. What a fiasco. Karma had other plans for me. Kroonstad is a predominantly African city, with all the staff of this medium security, long-term prison, being Afrikaners. I, on the other hand, had never had to use Afrikaans in a conversation, outside of school. English was my home language, and still is. I decided to make the best of a bad situation, and knuckle down. I was allotted a room, to share with another wardress, in a house across the wide dirt road from our lieutenant's house. It was August, the windy month here. It was also the year of the Great Drought, 1966. Sometimes the wind and dust were so bad that the lieutenant's house was barely visible as I stepped out in the mornings to walk the short distance to work. The red dust was suffocating, playing havoc with my sinuses. As a novice, my first duty was as a gatekeeper. I was given a union key, which opened the gate to the main corridor, leading to the courtyards and kitchen. I was only allowed to let uniformed personnel in or out. At first, I took a great interest, watching the comings and goings of the staff, hearing snippets of their conversations, and trying to string together the meaning of their words. I soon tired of this, as I became accustomed to the language. After a couple of weeks, I was sent for fittings for my uniform. I was still wearing civvies at this point. Seeing that I was in civvies and did not need to change out of uniform, my lieutenant ordered me to guard a prisoner, who had to go for treatment at the doctor in the city. I soon learned that this prisoner was the only English-speaking woman in the prison. Fraternizing with prisoners was expressly forbidden. On the ride into Kronstadt Center, when this woman heard that I was English, it was as if the floodgates opened. She poured into my ear the tale of how she and her husband had been nabbed for fraud. Both had been sent to Kronstadt prison to spend their sentences. Both in the same prison, but widely separated from each other, seemingly never to see each other again. On the ride back to the prison, this woman told me how she had been sent to the sewing room within the prison walls to help make postal bags. According to her, this room had a window, or windows, very high up, near the ceiling, to let in sunlight. One day, while working there, she heard a noise coming from the roof. It is a high one-story building. She looked up to see what was going on. To her utter amazement, she espied her husband, dangling from a rope outside the window. He saw her, let go of the roof and waved to her. Suddenly, he let out a yell and disappeared from sight. This was followed by an ominous thud. She was shocked and alarmed by these events. She later learned that her husband had been sent on a maintenance detail to fix something on the women's side of the prison. I don't remember what. He had by great chance seen his wife through the window. While waving to her, the safety rope had broken, and he had plunged to his death. It was allegedly through this experience that this woman had to go for treatment. I never found out if this was all true, because I was too scared to admit to any of the staff that I had spoken to her, or even listened to her. I did not want her, or me, to get into trouble. I don't know if listening to this woman's story had any bearing on events which followed. I will leave it to my readers to be the judge of that. A month or so later, I was assigned to first night shift, 4 until 12 p.m. I was shown the route I was to follow, clocking in at various points to prove that I had actually done my rounds. This route led through the kitchens, near to the sewing room and chapel. At first, I had no problem with this. It was actually great. I had the whole day off until 4 p.m., then had to report for the parade and then go on duty. I could even put reverse calls through to my fiancé from the lieutenant's office. But we fought a lot over the phone. I started to become very nervy and somewhat depressed. Suddenly, my trips through the kitchens, 2 large ones back to back, became a nightmare. I got a feeling of dread every time I approached them. I could not pinpoint the cause. It was not that I saw anything out of place or heard anything unusual. Under the harsh electric lighting of the long corridor, all that was heard was that damnable wind, howling through the eaves, and my scurrying footsteps. I was just plain scared shitless. I would feel my palms become sweaty as I clasped my large key. My heart would feel like it was clutched in an ever-tightening icy grip. As I entered the first kitchen, it would seem as if all the hounds of hell gathered at my heels to gnash at me with their fangs. This caused me to make a frantic dash to reach the other side, and the safety of the other side of this phalanx-shaped building, there to continue my rounds and afterwards turn around and retrace my steps back through the dreaded kitchens. This eventually became too much for me. My sanity was hanging on by a thread. I started self-medicating on pills. I felt as if something very evil resided within the walls of those kitchens. My health took a sudden dive. My nerves and sinuses could no longer take the pounding. On the insistence of my superior, I visited the doctor. After listening to me, he huffed a few times, then made a phone call from another room. On his return, he wrote something on what looked like a report sheet, wrote something else on a notepad, which he tore off and handed to me. I learned that I had just got a medical discharge from the prison services. The next day, I was on my way to Randfontein, courtesy of the Correctional Services bus.
My former boss, an old Mexican man named Fernando, told me about a night he spent in jail. He said it was a small-town jail in Texas, and there was only one guard on duty. Fernando asked the guard for some water, so then the guard went and got him a cup of water. He told me the guard went off to do something else, and then a preacher came by. The preacher asked him how he was doing, and he said all he wanted was some cold water. The preacher went off with the cup of water and came back with ice in it. The preacher left, and the guard came back shortly after. The guard took Fernando out of the cell to do his paperwork or fingerprints or something, and noticed he had ice in his water. The guard asked him where he got the ice from, and Fernando said, "That preacher went and got me some ice." The guard was like, "What are you talking about? We don't have a preacher here. We don't have any ice machine either. I don't even get ice." The guard got pretty freaked out about it apparently and was just like, "You know what, man, just go. I don't know how you got that ice in here, and I don't want you in here."
You can either grow from it or not. Most don't and just dwell. I realized my relationship with all things better when I was out. Isolation makes you appreciate the little things again. The car ride out of your tower to court, seeing the trees and open sky, cars, innocents going about their day. Your cell becomes a place of meditation. You read, you write, you sit and think, you exercise and do yoga. Sober, just enough food to not die, so you're fasting. It's a wonderful mental reset. I used to think the system is designed to keep certain souls down, but then I learned it's a place to put a soul that's basically in timeout, and certain ones don't want to learn and grow from it, so they end up back there. It does break your spirit, though, not your spirituality, but your sense of wonder and lightheartedness is just so put to halt for so long. Learning to be truly calm takes a while. Being homeless for a week or so during late summer was super easy, but part of my journey. I was finally with the trees and with the open sky. I could sleep under the stars at a park that was super safe near the burbs, go and get a coffee and a burger in the morning. Roam around with my dog, who just thought we were on a never-ending walk and loving the attention from strangers. Being reunited with a pet was monumental. It really mentally resets your gratefulness. If even 2 months of jail doesn't give you enough time to rethink priorities and your focus and align your mind and soul, then I honestly don't know what to tell you to do.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.